The night began in the quietest way imaginable, as if the whole kingdom was taking a long, slow breath before bedtime. Twilight had just settled in, soft, purple, and calm, spreading like watercolor across the sky. The sun had slipped behind the hills, leaving behind a gentle glow that rested on the rooftops like sleepy fireflies. Then, as if someone far away decided the scene needed a touch more drama, the first raindrop fell. It tapped on a wooden roof. Then another followed, and another, and soon the whole kingdom sounded like it was wrapped inside a giant, cozy drum made of clouds and rain. Not the loud, scary kind of rain. No, this was the soft type. The kind that makes you want to curl up under a warm blanket and sigh. The kind that tells you, hey, everything's fine. Go ahead and relax. Wind drifted through the tall trees outside the castle, moving slow, like it was tired from a long day of traveling. It brushed through the leaves, making them whisper to each other. Maybe they were gossiping about the weather, or maybe they were just complaining that the rain was ruining their evening plans. Leaves do that sometimes. Down in the village, lanterns began to glow one by one. Some were golden, some were soft orange, and some flickered as if they were unsure whether they wanted to stay awake or not. They lined the pathways like tiny sleepy stars, guiding late walkers home. And deep inside this peaceful kingdom, tucked safely between rolling hills and old forests, stood a beautiful stone castle. It wasn't too grand or flashy. It didn't scream power or pride. Instead, it had this warm and inviting feeling about it, like a friend's house where they always make you tea without asking. The kingdom that surrounded this castle was known for many things, like kindness, honesty, and a strange love for polite conversations. People here thanked the rain for feeding their crops. They thanked their cows for giving milk. They even thanked their doors for not squeaking too loudly. It was a wholesome place, maybe even a little too wholesome at times. For generations, the royal family had ruled with gentle hearts. They believed in simple things: fairness, respect, and the idea that good manners could solve almost any problem. They weren't perfect. Sometimes the king forgot where he left his crown, and the queen had a habit of feeding stray birds, even when they didn't need feeding. But the kingdom loved them all the same. Now, this peaceful royal family had one more gentle problem to solve. Their son, the young prince, needed to find a true princess. Not a princess who just liked jewels or fancy gowns. Not a princess who carried 10 servants behind her or boasted about her noble blood. No, they wanted someone real. Someone kind. Someone who felt things deeply like they did. Someone who didn't step on ants if she could help it. The king and queen believed in the idea of a true princess. A person with a soft heart, strong spirit, and a sense of empathy so deep that she could feel even the tiniest discomfort. Some might call it sensitivity. The queen called it good breeding. The prince called it just being a decent human. Either way, it mattered to them. But here's the thing, they weren't stressed about it. They didn't make loud announcements, or host dramatic palace competitions, or line up princesses from every corner of the globe. No one was forced to spin straw into gold or guess weird riddles. This wasn't that kind of kingdom. Instead, the royal family took a chill approach. If the right princess comes, the king said one day, while stirring honey into his tea. "She comes." The queen nodded and added, "And if she doesn't, that's all right too. The boy can live his life. We're not in a rush." The prince, sitting nearby with a half smile, said nothing. Not because he didn't care. He simply trusted the universe to send the right person when the time was right. He was that kind of person, calm, patient, and a little dreamy. He spent his days reading, walking through the gardens, playing chess with old knights who always let him win, even though he definitely didn't need the help. He had been to a few kingdoms to meet potential princesses, but none of them felt quite right. Some were too proud. Some were too serious. One talked only about her cats for 3 hours. The prince liked cats. He just didn't want to marry all 12 of hers. And so the search slowed down. The king stopped arranging introductions. The queen stopped polishing the silverware in preparation for guests. And the prince stopped pretending he wasn't relieved. That night, as the storm began to settle deeper over the land, the castle felt even cozier. The guards walked their rounds in quiet steps. Servants lit a few candles here and there to guide the dim hallways. And the smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchen. Because in this kingdom, apparently even storms made the cook hungry. Inside the royal study, the king and queen sat by a warm fire. The flames danced in a soft rhythm, casting golden reflections over the old books and tapestries. "It's a nice storm," the queen said, holding a cup of herbal tea. "Lovely," the king agreed. "Perfect night for storytelling." "Perfect night for sleeping," she corrected. The king nodded slowly. He wouldn't win that argument. Up in his room, the prince listened to the rain tapping against his window. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded like a gentle lullaby. He leaned back in his chair and watched the drops slide down the glass, moving like tiny travelers on their own little journey. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered to himself, not really expecting anything. "Maybe tomorrow will bring something new." If only he knew how right he was. Because somewhere out in the storm, on the other side of the castle gates, a young woman was making her way toward the kingdom. Wet, tired, and carrying nothing but the hope of finding shelter. She didn't look like much of a princess at that moment. Her hair was soaked, her dress was muddy, and she had probably sneezed about 12 times already. But life has a funny way of hiding miracles in messy places. And before the storm ended, before the lanterns burned out for the night, and before the prince completely drifted into sleep, she would arrive. Cold, exhausted, shivering, and exactly who the kingdom had been gently waiting for. Long before the stormy night, when the mysterious young woman would knock on the castle gate, the prince had already traveled across the known world. Not because he was desperate, not because his parents pushed him, and definitely not because he enjoyed awkward royal introductions where someone told him, "My daughter is very talented at embroidery," and then the daughter sat there silently, staring at her shoes. No, the prince went exploring simply because he believed the world had answers waiting in quiet places. He liked calm roads, gentle mornings, and learning how other people lived. And if he happened to meet a true princess along the way, well, that would just be a bonus. So one spring morning, after a calm breakfast and a mildly emotional hug from the queen, not emotional, she said. Just supportive. The prince set off. He traveled with only a few guards, a horse with a slightly dramatic personality, and a small chest of essentials. You know, clothes, maps, and enough snacks to feed a small village. The queen insisted. The prince's first stop was the Valley of Misty Mountains, a place where the air looked like soft silver, smoke floating between tall peaks. The mornings there were so quiet, even the birds seemed to speak in whispers. When the prince rode into the valley, he felt the whole world slow down. The mountains stretched high above him like old giants, resting their chins on the clouds. Streams ran gently through the rocks, making soft music that almost sounded like lullabies. He met a princess there. She lived in a grand stone hall with a view that made you want to stare forever. She was kind and polite, but also very serious. The kind of person who straightens her socks twice and arranges her teacups by height. She and the prince had a pleasant conversation, mostly about weather patterns and the optimal way to store wool. She was lovely, but there was no spark. No sense of, yes, this is my person. The prince thanked her, bowed, and left the valley with no regrets. He took one last long look at the mist rolling off the mountains and thought, beautiful place. Not my princess, though. From the mountains, he traveled to the southern harbors, places where the sea looked like sheets of glass stretching to the horizon. The docks were lined with quiet boats, gently rocking with the tide, as if nodding off to sleep. Here the prince walked along sandy shores, watching fishermen mend their nets and children chase waves with giggles that carried through the breeze. Everything smelled like warm sunlight and salt water. A princess lived there too, in a palace made of smooth white stone. She was funny, bright, and very talkative. She told stories about sea creatures, storms, and the time she tried to convince a crab to be her pet. The prince liked her, truly, but she had a fiery energy that made him feel like he needed a nap after 10 minutes. He preferred calm seas, not wild waves splashing in all directions. So once again, he thanked her kindly and continued on his journey. His guards, who secretly liked her bold voice because they didn't have to talk much when she was around, sighed a little. But the prince knew what he felt, or didn't feel. Next, the prince wandered into the quiet green forests of the west. These were not spooky storybook woods, no wolves lurking around or witches hiding behind trees, just gentle, peaceful forests where sunlight dripped through leaves like honey and the ground was covered in soft moss. Birds hopped from branch to branch, singing tunes that sounded like they were half asleep. Deer walked calmly through the trees, never rushing anywhere. Even the wind moved lazily, drifting through the branches with a sleepy hum. The princess of this region lived in a wooden lodge decorated with forest flowers and delicate carved doors. She greeted the prince with a bright smile and offered him berry tea that was so sweet, he wondered if sugar had feelings. She was lovely, kind, calm, and very connected to nature. But she cared more about caring for injured birds than meeting a prince. She even cut their conversation short to check on a squirrel with a sore paw. The prince respected that truly. But again, she wasn't his match. By this point, the prince had met princesses from mountain peaks, river kingdoms, desert lands, and snow-covered villages. Each one had something special, but none felt like home. And here's where the documentary part of this tale kicks in. In old story traditions, royalty wasn't only about wealth or crowns. It wasn't about perfect posture or memorizing 20 fancy table rules. Back then, a true princess meant something deeper. Someone who carried empathy in her heart. Someone who felt things, joy, sadness, even discomfort, with honesty. A true royal had grace, not the kind that comes from dancing lessons, but the kind that lives inside the spirit. A softness that made the world around them feel safe. That's what the prince was looking for. Even if he couldn't say it out loud, he wanted someone who noticed small things, like how sunlight fell across a room, or how a stranger's voice softened when they talked about something they loved. Someone who didn't pretend. Someone who didn't hide behind polish or pride. So his journey continued, but never in a hurry. He stayed in small inns. He walked on quiet trails. He watched sunsets from places he couldn't even name. And every now and then, he would smile and think, the world is big. My person is somewhere out there, maybe taking her own journey too. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. And the prince's heart never grew worried or heavy. He wasn't chasing a fairy tale ending. He was simply moving, learning, listening. Finally, after one full year on the road, he stopped at the top of a hill overlooking the kingdom, the place he called home. The castle stood in the distance, glowing warm against the evening sky. The prince let out a long breath, not sad, not tired, just full of peace. When the right person arrives, he said softly, she will arrive. It wasn't a wish. It wasn't a prayer. It was simply the truth he believed. So he rode down the hill, back toward the quiet kingdom he loved. Back to the calm halls, the slow days, the gentle people. Back to the place where one stormy night, the real journey would begin. The storm had been building since late afternoon, the way storms sometimes do, slowly, quietly, as if they're clearing their throat before speaking. By early evening, the sky had darkened into a deep blue, grey, like a curtain being pulled across the heavens. Soft thunder rolled in the distance, not angry, not sharp, just a low, gentle rumble that felt more like the earth stretching than anything dangerous. Rain began soon after. First a few shy drops, tapping on the castle windows as if asking permission to enter. Then a steady fall, the sort of rain that smooths the edges of a long day. It washed over the old stone towers, slid down the roof tiles, and filled the air with that clean, comforting smell that comes whenever the world decides to rinse itself. Inside the castle, the hallways glowed with warm candlelight. Shadows drifted lazily across the walls as the flames flickered. Everything felt slow, calm, and half asleep. Even the guards on night duty seemed relaxed, leaning against door frames, listening to the rain, letting the storm lull them like a lullaby. But outside, the storm had found its voice. The wind began to whisper around the castle walls, nothing fierce, but steady, like someone telling a quiet story. Every once in a while, the thunder would deepen again, sounding a bit closer, as if the sky wanted to be part of whatever was about to happen. And something was about to happen. This is one of those moments where a documentary narrator would lower their voice and say, that night, the storm carried more than rain. It carried a turning point. And honestly, they'd be right. because while the royal family settled in for the evening, wrapped in blankets, sipping warm drinks, thinking about nothing more dramatic than which pastry to have in the morning, the universe had other plans. Somewhere outside, in the darkness and rain, footsteps were making their way toward the castle gate. Not grand footsteps. Not the kind that announce a royal procession or a messenger carrying urgent news. These were softer, slower, almost hesitant. The kind of footsteps made by someone tired, soaked, and probably questioning all their life decisions up to that moment. The storm grew slightly louder, rain tapping against the castle gate like fingers on a drum. The guards didn't expect anything to happen, and to be fair, almost nothing ever happened on stormy nights, except maybe a wet cat wandering in. So when a sudden knock echoed through the gatehouse, it startled everyone wide awake. It wasn't a strong knock, more like a, "Hi, sorry to bother you, but please help," kind of knock. The guards looked at one another confused. "Did you hear that?" "I think so. Or maybe the wind just sneezed." No, that was a real knock. They hurried to the gate, opened the small viewing panel, and saw a figure standing outside in the rain. A girl, no, a young woman. Her cloak clung to her like wet paper. Her hair was plastered to her forehead. Water dripped from her sleeves. She looked like she had been traveling for hours, maybe days, and the storm had personally decided to throw an entire bucket of water on her as a final challenge. She didn't try to look important. She didn't announce her status. She didn't even try to stand tall. She just looked tired and cold, and a little embarrassed to be knocking on the castle gate in the middle of a storm. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice shaky but polite. I know it's late, but may I come inside? Just to stay until the storm ends." The rain poured harder behind her, as if the storm wanted to add a dramatic drumroll to the moment. The guards didn't hesitate. No one in the kingdom ever turned away someone during weather like this. They opened the gate at once, guiding her into the warm glow of the torchlight. And this is where a little documentary note fits in. In old fairy tales, storms were often symbols of big change. If lightning cracked, something important was about to happen. If rain fell, destiny was washing up at someone's doorstep. And if thunder rolled gently, like tonight, it usually meant a transformation was coming, but a quiet one, the soft kind that sneaks up on you. The young woman stepped inside, shivering but smiling politely. Even soaked, even exhausted, she carried a certain peacefulness. Not fancy, not dramatic, just a kind of gentle presence that made people speak softly around her. Word traveled quickly through the castle, because news always travels quickly in a quiet place. By the time the guards escorted her to the entrance hall, the Queen was already there waiting. The Queen wasn't dramatic either. She didn't rush in, she didn't demand answers, and she definitely didn't squint suspiciously like someone in a mystery movie. She simply stood there in her soft night robe, hands wrapped around a warm mug, curious but calm. When she saw the young woman, her expression softened even more. "Oh dear," the Queen murmured kindly. "You must be freezing. Come in, come in. Let's get you warm." The girl curtsied awkwardly, rain still dripping from the ends of her cloak. "I'm sorry for troubling you," she said. "I'm a princess from a faraway land. I was traveling when the storm caught me. My carriage broke down and—" she paused, looking a little embarrassed. "Well, here I am." Now, you'd expect the Queen to react dramatically to the word princess, but she didn't. She'd met enough people in her life to know that anyone can claim anything when they're cold and drenched. And besides, the Queen wasn't the type to judge. She didn't demand proof. She didn't ask for royal documents or a family seal or a DNA test, which, let's be honest, would have been hard to do in medieval times anyway. Instead, she simply smiled and said, "Well, princess or not, you're welcome here." That was the Queen's way, gentle, warm, always giving people the benefit of the doubt. And something about the young woman, her simple posture, her quiet voice, her lack of dramatic introduction, made the Queen feel that this visitor was genuine. A servant hurried over with a towel. Another brought a blanket. Someone fetched warm soup. The atmosphere shifted from surprise to comfort in less than a minute. But somewhere deep in the Queen's mind, a tiny spark of curiosity lit up. Could this be the moment they'd been waiting for? The moment the prince's gentle, patient search finally connected with fate. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't even hint at it. She simply welcomed the girl further into the castle, her eyes thoughtful. And meanwhile, the storm continued outside. Soft thunder rolling in the clouds, rain shimmering like silver threads, wind whispering through the stone arches, as if the night itself was quietly announcing, "Pay attention. Something important has arrived." The castle grew quiet as the night deepened. The storm outside softened into nothing more than a light drizzle, the kind that barely taps the windows and sounds like someone slowly brushing their fingertips across glass. Inside, the candles burned low, glowing like tiny suns along the hallways. Most of the castle staff had drifted off to rest, leaving only a few night servants moving gently through the halls. But the Queen, she was still awake. Not because she was worried, not because she was suspicious. In fact, she wasn't suspicious at all. Instead, she felt something warm, something hopeful. Something she hadn't felt in a long time, ever since the prince returned from his long search with that calm, peaceful acceptance of, when the right person arrives, she will arrive. Tonight, someone had arrived, and the Queen just wanted to understand who she was. It wasn't a test of harshness. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't even a challenge. It was more like a little curiosity project. A gentle experiment, you could say. The Queen wanted to see if the girl truly held that old, quiet quality the kingdom had always valued, sensitivity. Not the dramatic kind. Not the cry because someone ate your dessert kind. But the deeper kind, the sensitivity of heart, empathy, awareness, inner grace. In fairy tale traditions, there were many strange symbols used to reveal character. Golden apples, talking animals, magic riddles. But one of the simplest, and honestly, most surprising, was a pea. Yes, a pea. Tiny, green, round, kind of boring looking. The kind of food most people don't think about unless it rolls off their plate. But in old stories, the pea wasn't about food. It was a symbol, one that storytellers used to show how a true princess wasn't defined by clothes or crowns, but by a sensitivity so real that even something small could be felt. It wasn't about being weak. It wasn't about being picky. It was about noticing the world, picking up on emotions, feeling what others might ignore. That was the kind of nobility the kingdom valued most. And so, the Queen decided, not out of doubt, but out of gentle hope, she would prepare the bed. She walked down the hallway with slow, quiet steps, her gown whispering lightly against the floor. Every torch she passed gave off a warm glow that spread across the stone walls like soft honey. When she reached the guest chambers, she nodded for the night servants to gather. They came quickly but carefully, moving with that special nighttime slowness that says, "Let's not wake the entire castle." They carried stacks of feather mattresses, each one fluffier than the last. Imagine clouds stacked on top of clouds. That's what the mattresses looked like. Soft, pale, almost glowing under the candlelight. One servant held a tiny wooden box in both hands. Inside the box lay one single pea, small, smooth, perfectly ordinary, yet strangely important. The Queen lifted it out with a kind of reverence, the way someone might hold an ancient coin or a rare jewel. It was funny, really, that something so tiny had caused so many debates in royal storytelling circles for centuries. She placed the pea at the very bottom of the bed frame, just one little green dot against a sea of white sheets. Then came the mattresses, 20 of them. One after another, the servants stacked them, each layer sinking gently into the one beneath. The mattresses puffed up like soft marshmallows, rising higher and higher, until the bed began to look like a fluffy mountain. If a normal person tried to climb it, they'd need ladders, rope, and maybe a snack halfway up. But in this kingdom, tall fairy tale beds were just normal. After the mattresses came the quilts. 20 layers again. Each quilt was handmade, filled with feathers so light they floated like air. Some quilts were stitched with soft blue thread, some with gold, some with tiny patterns that only showed when the candlelight touched them just right. The servants laid each one carefully, smoothing them with gentle hands, making sure not a single fold was out of place. The Queen watched with a soft, thoughtful smile on her face. Even though it was a test, the whole atmosphere felt comforting, like preparing a room for a beloved guest. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just calm movements in a warm, glowing room. A few servants whispered quietly to each other. Why so many layers? Is the princess very delicate? No idea. Maybe she just likes tall beds. Well, she did come in a storm. If I were her, I'd want to sink into something soft too. The Queen heard them but didn't correct them. She liked their innocence. And maybe it was better this way. No pressure, no expectations, no dramatic explanations. The candle flames flickered softly, sending slow shadows drifting over the mountain of bedding. The room smelled faintly of lavender from the herbs tucked into the quilt corners. Everything felt peaceful, like the kind of serenity that makes a person want to yawn even if they're wide awake. The Queen walked around the bed one more time, checking that everything was perfect. Well, perfect in that gentle, slightly magical fairy tale way. She noticed a bit of stuffing poking out of one mattress. She tucked it back in. She saw a blanket corner folded too sharply. She smoothed it. She spotted a servant trying not to sneeze. She whispered, "Bless you," before the sneeze even escaped. Nothing escaped her attention tonight. When the bed was finished, it was almost comical how tall it looked. Even the Queen tilted her head back a little to look at the top. But instead of laughing at it, she smiled with a quiet sense of purpose. "This will be enough," she said softly. Not harsh, not strict, just a gentle confirmation, like the way a scientist closes a notebook or a baker nods at a perfectly risen loaf. A few moments later, the servants carried in warm candles and placed them on the bedside table. The flames glowed through the soft wax and created a faint halo of gold around the room. Everything looked dreamy, like the world had turned into a watercolor painting. And slowly, the castle settled again. The footsteps faded. The whispers stopped. The Queen's robe swayed gently as she moved toward the door. Just before stepping out, she turned back for a final glance. The tall bed, the soft quilts, the little pea hidden under it all. It wasn't a test of suspicion. It was more like a whisper into the night. "Let's see who you are," softly. Then, with a warm and hopeful heart, the Queen left the room. The castle sighed into silence once more, when the young woman, the quiet, rain-soaked princess who had knocked on the castle gate, finished her warm supper. The Queen guided her gently to the guest chamber. The hallways were peaceful now. The storm had drifted far away, leaving behind that soft, fresh smell the world gets after rain settles. Candles flickered in calm waves along the walls, their golden light making the shadows dip and dance like sleepy animals. The princess walked slowly, partly because she was tired, and partly because she was trying to make sure she didn't drip leftover rainwater on the royal carpet. She still felt a bit shy about showing up at the castle looking like a soggy leaf, but the Queen's kindness made her feel safe. When they reached the room, the princess's eyes widened. The bed, if you could still call it a bed, looked like a tower made of softness. 20 feather mattresses, 20 quilts, all stacked up like a pastry built by a baker who doesn't know when to stop layering. The princess blinked. "Oh," she whispered. "That's tall." The Queen smiled warmly. "Very comfortable," she said. "You'll sleep well." The princess wasn't sure if she believed that, but she nodded. She didn't want to seem ungrateful. After all, she'd arrived soaking wet, with tangled hair and muddy shoes. And yet the Queen had welcomed her with soft blankets, warm food, and eyes that held no judgment. A servant brought a small ladder, because yes, climbing this bed required equipment, and the princess looked at it like she was about to scale a mountain. "Hope I don't fall off," she joked softly. The Queen chuckled. "If you do, try to fall on the soft side." That actually made the princess smile. With careful steps, she climbed the ladder, one rung, then the next. The mattresses gave the tiniest wobble, like a stack of clouds trying to settle under her weight. When she finally reached the top, she gently crawled onto the quilts. The blankets hugged her like warm wings, and the pillow was so soft it almost disappeared under her cheek. "This feels nice," she murmured. And it did. The room was warm. The storm's leftover raindrops tapped gently on the window, the soft kind of tapping that sounds like someone whispering, "Sleep," over and over. Outside, the night sky was deep blue, dotted with small patches of stars peeking through the thin clouds. The candles glowed low, creating a cozy little bubble of light around the bed, while the edges of the room faded into calm shadows. The queen watched her settle in, offered a gentle good night, and closed the door with the softest click. The princess let out a long, tired breath. Finally, rest. Her body relaxed, her eyes fluttered, her mind drifted like a boat on a quiet lake. But then, just when she thought she was floating into sleep, she felt something tiny, something firm, something weird, right under the bedding. Not sharp, not painful, just there. She shifted a little. The something shifted with her. She changed positions. It followed. She tried to ignore it. "That's fine," she whispered to herself. "I'm exhausted. I can sleep anyway." Or she couldn't. She tried lying on her back. No good. She tried lying on her side. No luck. She tried curling up like a cat. Still that little bump beneath her, like a pebble under layers of blankets. It wasn't annoying enough to make her upset, just enough to keep her brain awake. Half asleep, but not quite kind of awake. And here is where the documentary part of the tale sneaks in again. Long ago, storytellers believed sensitivity was not a weakness. It was a sign of awareness, a royal trait. It meant a person noticed small things, a change in tone, a shift in weather, a sadness in someone's voice. Being sensitive meant their heart worked like a finely tuned instrument. They could pick up the quiet tremble in the world. So in old stories, the person who could feel something tiny, even beneath layers and layers of softness, was the one whose heart was most open. Sensitivity wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was gentle, quiet, the same way a soft breeze can move a whole field of grass. The princess didn't know about any of that, of course. She wasn't thinking, "This is a symbolic test of my innate emotional awareness." She was thinking something much simpler. Why does this very comfortable bed have a tiny bump in it? She tried to ignore it again. She breathed deeply. She let the warmth of the quilts press around her. She let her eyes droop. She listened to the relaxing sounds of the night. The rain had faded completely now, leaving only a soft rhythm of droplets slipping from the castle roof. The breeze outside brushed gently past the shutters, humming quiet notes. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted once, sleepily, as if even the animals were settling in. Inside the castle, everything settled into stillness. The corridors were quiet. The torches burned low. Even the servants who stayed awake for night duty moved like shadows, careful not to disturb the peace. The princess lay there, eyes half open, half closed, drifting in that strange middle place between dreaming and waking. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here. The storm, the cold, the surprise of a gentle queen opening the door, the warm meal, the candlelit room, and under all of that, still the tiny, mysterious bump. She sighed, but in a soft, almost amused way. "Maybe this castle just has interesting beds," she whispered. She wasn't upset. She wasn't frustrated. Just puzzled. Sleepy and puzzled. The hours drifted by. The candles melted slowly into small pools of gold. The moon rose higher. The sky cleared into a blanket of stars. Every now and then, a faint breeze fluttered the curtains, brushing the room in silver light. And the princess, she drifted in and out of restless rest, not uncomfortable, just aware of the softness, aware of the quiet, aware of that tiny thing beneath her. It was a peaceful kind of restlessness, the kind that doesn't ruin the night, only adds a question mark to it. And so, Through the quiet hours, she waited for morning, not knowing that this tiny, gentle discomfort, this little something, was about to change everything. Dawn arrived the way soft mornings always do, quiet, gentle, and without any hurry. The storm from the night before had washed the world clean, and now the first light of day slipped into the sky like warm milk pouring over blue water. A pale gold glow touched the highest towers of the castle, brushing the stone with a faint shimmer. Out in the gardens, dew rested on the rose petals, tiny droplets sitting delicately like glass beads. When the first breeze of the morning moved through, the roses swayed in slow motion, as if stretching after a long night. Birds perched on branches, still half asleep, making little chirps that sounded more like sleepy good mornings than songs. It was the kind of dawn that made everything feel soft, like the whole world was wrapped in a blanket. Inside the castle, the servants began to stir. They moved quietly, almost floating across the floors so as not to disturb the peace that still hung in the hallways. Candles were replaced. Curtains were pulled back. Warm light spilled in, mixing with the leftover glow of the torches. And in the guest chamber, the room with the tall mountain of mattresses, the princess blinked awake. Well, wake might not be the right word. She had rested, yes, but slept, not really. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, taking in the soft morning colors drifting through the window. The sky was a blend of peach and gold. The air felt fresh, as if a new story had quietly stepped into the room. She stretched her arms out, then winced. Her back felt a little stiff. Not painful, just confused, like it had been poked gently all night by a curious little ghost. She sighed. That tiny bump again, she murmured. She wasn't annoyed. She wasn't upset. In fact, she found herself laughing softly. I travel through storms, sleep in barns, rest under trees, and this is the bed that keeps me awake. She sat up slowly, smoothing her hair, which had dried overnight into soft little waves. The quilts slid around her like warm clouds. She glanced around the room and smiled at the neat, peaceful space. The candles melted into little golden puddles, the curtains lightly swaying with the morning breeze. A knock sounded at the door. "Good morning," the Queen's warm voice said from the hall. "May I come in?" The princess nodded, even though the Queen couldn't see it. "Yes, please," she called, her voice gentle. The Queen stepped in with the kind of grace that didn't need effort. She carried no crown now, just a soft morning gown and a calm smile, the kind that made even tired eyes feel comforted. The king followed behind her, quiet, kind-looking, with the peaceful calm of someone who enjoyed watching birds as a hobby. "How did you sleep?" the Queen asked softly. The princess hesitated, glancing down at the enormous stack of bedding beneath her. She didn't want to sound rude or ungrateful. After all, they had given her shelter, warmth, and kindness when she most needed it. So she spoke in the most polite way she could think of. "I rested," she said gently, "but I didn't sleep very well." The Queen's eyebrows lifted a little, not in surprise, not in worry, but in a kind of soft understanding. "Oh, was something wrong?" the Queen asked. The princess shifted again and tried not to laugh. "I'm not sure. I just kept feeling something small, hard, like a little stone under all the mattresses." She tapped the quilt lightly with her hand. "It sounds silly, I know. The bed is beautiful and so soft." But I still felt something through it. The Queen didn't look offended. She didn't look confused. She didn't even tilt her head the way people sometimes do when they think someone is exaggerating. Instead, she smiled, calm, knowing, gentle. The King, standing beside her, let out a soft breath that sounded almost like relief. He exchanged a look with the Queen. It wasn't a look of triumph. There was no pride or, "Ah, we caught you," energy. Just quiet recognition, the same way a gardener might smile when the first bud of spring appears. The princess blinked. "Did I say something strange?" The Queen stepped closer, her voice warm and soothing. "Not strange at all, dear. In fact, quite meaningful." The princess tilted her head. "Meaningful how?" And here came that soft documentary tone, the kind of voice someone uses when telling an old story passed down through generations. "In old tales," the Queen began, "sensitivity was a sign of true nobility. Not the kind you wear on your head, but the kind you carry in your heart." The King nodded gently beside her. Those stories taught that a person who could feel something very small. The Queen continued, "Even beneath great comfort was someone who noticed the world deeply. Someone with empathy. Someone with natural grace." The princess listened quietly, almost forgetting about her tired back. "You see," the Queen added with a faint smile, "the test was never about being delicate. It was about awareness, understanding, a heart that feels what others might ignore." The princess's eyes widened slightly, not in shock, but in that soft kind of realization that settles slowly. "A test?" she asked. The Queen nodded kindly. "A very gentle one." As she stepped to the side and motioned to the servants, who had just arrived with warm morning light, following them through the open door. They carefully began removing the quilts, one layer, then another, and another. The princess watched, her curiosity growing. The quilts kept coming off, more and more of them, until the mountain of fabric shrank into something closer to a hill. Then the mattresses came next. 1, 2, 5, 10. Finally, when the servants reached the very bottom, the Queen bent down and picked something up from the mattress frame. Just one. Small, ordinary, simple. The Queen held it between her fingers, her eyes warm and steady. "This," she said softly, "was beneath everything." The princess stared at it for a long moment, then let out a quiet breath. "So that's what I felt." The King gave her a peaceful smile. "Not everyone would have," he said gently. "In fact, very few could." The Queen's voice softened even more. "Sensitivity, my dear, is not weakness. It is strength, quiet strength, the kind that listens, the kind that understands, the kind that leads with a soft heart." Warm morning light filled the room, touching the princess's face, making her look like she belonged in the golden glow. For the first time since she had arrived, she didn't feel like a stranger. She felt seen. And in that calm morning moment, something in the air shifted, soft, quiet, and full of meaning. Morning came soft and slow, the kind of morning that didn't rush in, but wandered in like it had all the time in the world. The castle felt different today, lighter, almost humming under its breath, like it knew a secret it had been waiting centuries to share. Even the halls, usually quiet and echoing, seemed to glow in the gentle gold of the early sun. It wasn't loud. It wasn't bright. It was just peaceful. The whole kingdom felt like it had taken a long breath and finally let it out. Word had already travelled through the castle, mostly because the kitchen staff whispered louder than they thought, and the guards at the door gossiped even more than the kitchen staff. But the whole place now knew the princess, soaked and tired from the storm, was no ordinary visitor. She had felt the tiny pea hidden under the mountain of quilts and mattresses, which meant she had the true royal sensitivity. And not the dramatic kind, more like the soft, heart-aware kind that fairy tales used to brag about. So today, the castle was getting ready for a celebration. Not a huge one. Not the kind with trumpets and fireworks and dramatic speeches that nobody wanted to listen to. No, this was a gentle celebration, warm, calm, and full of the kind of joy that sits quietly but deeply. A celebration that matched the people in it. The great hall was the first place to wake up. Servants walked in with armfuls of flowers, wild ones from the gardens, mostly white and pale pink, all smelling fresh like clean rain. They placed them in tall clay vases and tiny crystal bowls on wide window sills and along the long wooden tables. Everything looked alive, but nothing looked crowded. Just simple beauty, like nature had decided to join breakfast. Music floated in from the far corner of the room. Not dancing music. Everyone spin till you get dizzy type, but soft strings, played by musicians who looked as gentle as the notes they made. A slow tune drifted through the hall, light, warm, and so smooth it felt like it wrapped itself around the guests before they even arrived. In the kitchen, the cooks were putting together the simplest, dreamiest feast: warm breads with butter that melted instantly, soft cheese, sweet fruit, honey, roasted nuts, and herbal teas. Nothing heavy, nothing too fancy. Just good food that made the castle smell like comfort. The prince, who had barely slept from excitement, stood near one of the long tables, trying to look calm. He was mostly succeeding, except for the part where he kept smoothing his hair every 30 seconds and pretending he was simply adjusting it for the breeze. There was no breeze. He just wanted to look nice. He wasn't thinking about royalty or tests or traditions. He was thinking about the girl who had walked in during the storm, shivering, humble, and still brave enough to knock on a strange castle's door. He remembered her soft smile, her tired eyes, her quiet manners. And he remembered how she talked to people, kindly, even while exhausted. He had felt something then, a little spark of recognition, like, oh, here you are. The queen stepped beside him, adjusting her shawl. You look nervous, she said in a tone that wasn't teasing, just observant. He blinked, attempting to stand straighter. Nervous? No. Not at all. I'm perfectly calm. A pause. Your shirt is buttoned wrong, she said gently. He looked down. It was, in fact, very wrong. Right, he murmured, quietly fixing it. Maybe a tiny bit nervous. Meanwhile, across the hallway, the princess was preparing too, but not with makeup or jewelry or anything fancy. She wore a simple gown the queen had chosen for her, soft, flowing, pale blue like the morning sky. Her hair was brushed gently by one of the castle maids, who kept saying, "Your hair is so soft, my lady," every few minutes, and the princess kept answering, "It's really just messy, it only looks soft." They both giggled, and the room felt warm. The princess breathed in slowly. She wasn't used to attention or big rooms or royal halls. But something about this castle made her feel calm, like it wanted her to be herself. No pressure, no expectations, just her. And after the long stormy night and the strange lumpy sleep, she actually felt rested in a weird way, not physically, but somewhere deeper. One of the younger servants knocked on her door with a shy smile. "They're ready for you in the great hall." His voice cracked slightly, but he pretended it didn't. The princess followed him down the hallway, her hands folded gently in front of her. When she stepped into the hall, everything seemed to brighten a little, or maybe that was just how everyone looked at her. With quiet kindness, not loud excitement. The prince stood from where he waited and walked toward her. His smile was small but real, the kind that warms the whole face, not just the mouth. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly. "I'm glad too," she said, her voice a little shy but steady. They walked together to the center of the hall as the music shifted into something soft and hopeful. The queen and king approached them with gentle smiles. The king spoke first, in a voice like warm tea. "You showed us something rare," he said. "Not strength of the usual kind, but the kind that listens, feels, and pays attention. That is what we honor today." The princess didn't know what to say at first. She simply bowed her head a little, touched by the honesty in his words. The queen added, "You don't have to prove anything more. Just be yourself. That is enough here." Everyone took their seats, and the celebration began. Not with loud cheers, but with soft laughter, quiet conversations, and warm plates passed from hand to hand. The prince and princess sat next to each other, speaking in gentle tones, sharing stories of their pasts. The princess told him about traveling through many towns, helping where she could, learning from everyone she met. She wasn't running from anything. She was wandering life like a story page. The prince told her about the kingdom, how he loved the gardens, how he secretly fed bread to the ducks, even though the gardener said the ducks were spoiled enough already. They laughed, not loudly but warmly. They talked about dreams, his of a peaceful kingdom, hers of a place to belong. And somewhere between the soft music and the drifting sunlight, they realized they wanted the same things: calm mornings, gentle hearts, and a life built on simple goodness. By midday, the celebration was still going, but not once had anyone shouted or danced wildly. It was all soft joy, the kind that stays with you for years. And as the prince and princess walked through the garden after the feast, flowers blooming, bees humming lazily, the world calm around them, it felt like the story had settled into the place it was always meant to be. Not flashy, not loud, just right, just enough, and very, very true. There are some objects in royal history that look grand and powerful. Crowns, swords, jewels the size of your eyeball, and tapestries that took entire lifetimes to finish. And then there is the pea. Yes, the tiny green pea. The one that caused a princess to toss and turn through 20 feather mattresses and 20 quilts. The one that proved sensitivity wasn't a weakness but a gift. The one that somehow survived a storm, a test, a long night, and a very dramatic tradition. Today that pea rests in the quietest room of the Royal Museum. It sits inside a glass case placed right in the center of the room, lit by a soft golden lamp that makes it glow like it has its own tiny spotlight. The case is tall and elegant, with carved wooden legs and glass so clear it looks like air. And inside the case, on a little velvet pillow that seems a bit too fancy for a vegetable, the pea waits. Still green, still round, still very small. Visitors walk by and stare at it like they're looking at a miracle. Some lean in, squinting. Some tilt their heads. One small child even once asked, "Is this a joke?" And her mother whispered, "Shit's history." And in a way it is. Not because the pea itself is special, but because of what it represents. This little green thing became the symbol of one of the rarest traits in old fairy tales: true sensitivity. The kind that means you feel the world with your whole heart. The kind that made queens whisper, kings nod, and storytellers smile as they wrote the tale down again and again. Now, let's zoom out a little, like a soft documentary moment. Imagine a cozy narrator voice, the kind you could fall asleep to. Something like, "And so, in the long tradition of fairy tales, objects like this pea were not just things, they were symbols. Storytellers used what they had: peas, storms, spinning wheels, glass slippers, to teach lessons that lasted far longer than the objects themselves. Why did they do that? Well, fairy tales were the ancient version of bedtime podcasts. They were how people passed down knowledge before books were common, before schools were everywhere, before the internet existed to distract everyone with cat videos. These tales taught values through symbols, a courage through dragons, the hope through magic, kindness through small acts, and in this story, sensitivity through a tiny green pea. Back then, sensitivity wasn't seen as being too soft or too emotional. It was seen as being aware of people's feelings, aware of changes in the world, aware of what kindness could do. Empathy was rare, and those who had it quietly guided others. So the storyteller who first wrote this tale didn't just pick a pea for fun. Though it's possible they enjoyed the idea of a vegetable becoming famous. They chose it because it was small, simple, and easy to overlook. Just like sensitivity often is. The documentary lens widens a little more, now capturing the whole kingdom. Evening has arrived. The castle sits under a wide sky painted in deep blue. The moon hangs above it like a silver lantern, not too bright, just steady and calm. Stars blink awake one by one, slow and patient. Down in the courtyard, lanterns sway on iron hooks, their flames warm and golden. The breeze is soft enough to make them flicker, but not strong enough to blow them out. People wander the pathways in slow steps, breathing in the peaceful night. Some talk quietly, some hold hands, some just enjoy the calm, like the whole kingdom is taking a slow exhale after many long days. The celebration from earlier has faded, leaving only traces of soft music drifting from the great hall windows. A gentle tune, nothing dramatic, nothing bold, just notes that float like warm smoke in cool air. Inside the museum, the pea sits silently, unaware that it has become the most famous vegetable in the land. The guards walk by every hour, their footsteps slow so they don't disturb the quiet room, even though the pea is not likely to get up and leave. But this moment, this peaceful kingdom, this soft night, they all feel like the perfect ending to the story. not loud, not flashy, just true. The narrator voice returns again, soft as a whisper. Fairy tales last because they carry more than magic. They carry meaning. They remind us of the small things we forget, like how gentleness can be strong, how empathy can guide us, and how one tiny pea can change a kingdom. The scene shifts one last time, gliding out of the castle windows and drifting into the night air. Trees sway lightly under the moon, their leaves whispering a quiet lullaby. The river glows with silver ripples. The whole land seems wrapped in a comfortable blanket made of shadows and starlight. Somewhere in a high tower, the princess stands near the balcony with the prince beside her. They don't speak much. They don't need to. They simply lean on the railing and look out at the peaceful world, sharing the same breath, the same quiet moment. It's the kind of silence that says everything. Below them, the kingdom settles deeper into calm. The last workers head home. Doors close softly, windows dim. A dog curls up under a bench and sighs. The lanterns continue to glow, steady and warm, marking the pathways like tiny suns. The air turns cooler, carrying the scent of night flowers and the faint smell of the earlier feast. The breeze brushes gently along the castle walls, whispering the end of the storm, the beginning of peace. It all feels like a story closing itself, not with a loud final chapter, but with a soft, content sigh. And now, as the whole land grows still, the narrator's voice fades into something even softer. So if you're listening, let this quiet settle into you too. Let the night wrap around your thoughts. Let the soft breeze, it's there, even if only in your imagination, help you let go of the day. There is nothing you need to fix right now, nothing you need to figure out. Just let yourself rest like the lanterns, glowing gently in the dark. Silence deepens. The moon keeps watch. The pea sleeps in its glass case. And you, yes, you can drift slowly into a calm, warming sleep, knowing the story has wrapped itself around you like a gentle quilt, safe and steady. Good night.